I'd like to share some thoughts about the materials we're using. I teach a number of basic circuits classes in our library makerspace, and I use things like a single D cell battery, a 1.5 volt battery, and a 1.5 volt bulb, and we can connect them up just like we're doing here in the MOOC this week and create a simple circuit where I have electrical energy being converted into some other form of energy and a completed circuit for the current to flow. And this works really well for when I'm just trying to show folks how a basic circuit looks. But when we're using this setup and we start adding in another bulb, for instance, in this case I'm going to set up what's called a series circuit, and the two bulbs are linked together like this. The theory tells us that both bulbs should be on, but at approximately half the brightness of what we saw with a single bulb. And just due to the nature of working with these small voltages and so forth, oftentimes one bulb won't light up at all, or they won't be even, or there'll be a problem. So this doesn't really show what I'm trying to convey when I'm trying to introduce things like Ohm's law and some other stuff. So what I saw with the Tinkering Studio, when they're using their battery packs, I really like that because I think it gives you the same tinkering access that we have, but now instead of using a single cell, we're using in this case a 4-pack of 4 AA's, which gives us a total of 6 volts, and I can put a 6 volt bulb in here just like I did with my single cell, and it lights up. This is a 6 volt bulb, 6 volt source, so that works well. And then if I want to talk about how to add other circuits together and how to add other elements into the circuit, and I want to make a series circuit with the bulbs, now the behavior is much more what I expect. They both turn on, they're both half bright, but because I'm using a full 6 volts, I'm not right down there at the very margins and where the voltages that we're using, 1.5 volts, are comparable to the errors in the circuit. Now the voltage is 6 volts, and that's much higher than any errors or inconsistencies from bulb to bulb that we might expect. So I really appreciate seeing this happen with the 6 volt pack, and I think it's going to change the way I teach and introduce the classes. So I'm glad for that. Another thing I'm interested in is I use a lot of knife switches in my classes. I like the knife switch because it's pretty obvious what it does. As the blade is open, the current can't flow across here. When the blade's closed, you have a path for the current to flow, and the circuit turns on. And indeed, if we hook it into the circuit, that's the behavior we get. What I haven't always appreciated, though, is that I've ended up with a lot more kids than I expected in my classes. I was anticipating more adults and so forth, and oftentimes I'll have adults, but I'm getting lots and lots of kids. And they like this, and they see how the knife switch, they see how the knife switch works, and it makes sense. When the switch is open, the bulb's off. When you close the switch, the circuit's completed, the bulb turns on. But I don't think they always see how this weird knife switch that everyone calls a Frankenstein switch or something, because maybe they've seen it in a movie or a cartoon, how it relates to the real world. So again, looking at how the Tinkering Studio has their materials and how the MOOC is presented, I'm kind of encouraged to start using other tools like this, an old house switch, and have it in a way that's very accessible, easy to use. It's no harder to hook into the circuit than the other one, but now it's a much more common tool that they see every day and use every day. And even though the implementation of how the switch works is hidden inside that plastic box, because we also have the knife switch and they can see how the knife switch works, then they can maybe start understanding, well, it's just doing the same thing. There's an open and a closed contact, and so whether it's a toggle switch like a wall switch or a push button switch or something else, they get the same behavior. So I'm really encouraged to play with these new tools and kind of expand what we can start doing. This is what we do in our first session in our basic circuits classes. We'll take with a battery, take a bulb, and maybe add a switch, and you turn a switch on and off, and that closes and opens the circuit, and the light comes on and off. And I talk about how you can expand this, and if you can turn on a light, you can turn on a motor, you can turn on a siren, but we don't actually do that. And it didn't occur to me, not sure why, that the usefulness of just taking some other component, maybe with a motor or a beeper, and doing the same type of materials and showing that it's the same circuit, just different end effectors, and strapping a motor and some nails to a board makes this a really simple way to do stuff. We have a hack session where we just tear stuff apart, and I'm always left with these bins of motors and bells and sirens and switches. This is a new way to start using it in our circuits classes. Just take some of these old components and slap them on a board with some nails, and we're good to go. The other thing I like is that we can take not just the switches, but also different resistors and potentiometers and so forth. One thing about these alligator clips, sometimes they're a little bit slippery with that boot on there. And I'll do this in classes where I introduce a potentiometer or resistors, but I don't do it in a way that's where it's tinkering. I don't just let people tinker with it. I sort of lecture about it a little bit more before I turn them loose. Whereas with the circuit like this, now people can kind of play with it and learn how it works.